Good evening. In a socially distanced world, Design United is an optimistic digital platform for collaborative design and connection. In a socially distanced world, Design United is an optimistic digital platform for collaborative design and connection. Design United was created in March 2020 during a period of intense lockdown and quarantine measures within the region. The aim behind Design United was to create an optimistic space for regional dialogue, connections, collaborations, and opportunities for young regional designers and design practices. A much needed network of support and peer mentorship during these uncertain times. Talented young designers and design studios working on design innovation with an approach that is relevant to our South Asian region have been invited to be a part of the platform. We also encourage design students from the region to share their work, be involved in the dialogue, and to be an active part of Design United. Design United, most of all, believes in creating a community of designers and design knowledge that is largely contextual, with focus on contributing to the environment and our community. Design United believes greatly in a spirit of collaboration and idea exchange. Welcome to Design United's 14th Design Conversation, in conversation with Ashini Nanayakara from Sri Lanka and Ayusha Sreshta from Nepal. I'm Varna Shashidhar, founder principal of a regional landscape practice, BSLA, based in Bengaluru. The aim behind Design United is to create an optimistic space for regional dialogue, connections, collaborations, and opportunities for young designers and design practices, a much needed network of support and peer mentorship during these uncertain times. We are supported by Clayworks in this endeavor. Also by the enthusiastic Design United core and editorial teams. The selected designers and design studios who have been a part of Design Conversation so far have looked at innovative design approaches and also bear a deep resonance with the place they are from. They genuinely believe in contributing to the environment and the community. Today's conversation will be with architectural photographer Ashni Nanayakara and Ayushi Sreshta, a jewelry designer from Nepal. In the past, we have had wonderful young designers and moderators from the region who have joined us in the conversations. We have had Bogar Studio and Studio Made, Anai Studio, Be Polite, Compartment S4, Three Flaneurs, architect Avinash Ankalge from India, Kavan Balasurya from Sri Lanka, and Studio Neba Kolpa World from Nepal. Theorists and architects Vaishnavi Shukla, Ishita Shah, Studio Unbuild from Mumbai, Eugene Koskaron from Singapore. We have also started a new mentorship segment to Design Conversation last month with architects Nisha Matthew Ghosh and architect Minwi from Sarawak, Malaysia, starting the very first segment. We've also added a new segment titled In Progress, featuring new practices with projects in progress discussing their work. The first segment was started with architects Harshit Nayak, Priyanka Rastagi from Para Studio, and architect Arjun Ravi from State of Design, mentored by architects Shabir Unwala from Lonavala and architect Palanda Kannagara from Sri Lanka. In our second In Progress session, we will feature the works of young architect Naomi Parekh from Gujarat, sharing her project, A House for an Ornithologist. With this background to Design United and upcoming series of lectures, let's move to the much awaited presentation and conversation with Ayushi Sreshta and Ashni Nanayakara. I'm delighted to welcome our presenting designers for the evening, joining us from Kathmandu and Melbourne. Their presentation will be followed by a moderated discussion So please do type in audience questions for our designers, which will be answered in the discussion that will follow the presentation. I'm delighted to introduce our presenting designer for the day, Ashni Nanayakara. Ashni Nanayakara is a photographer from Colombo, Sri Lanka. She is currently pursuing her Masters of Fine Art at RMIT, Melbourne, Australia, on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people. Ashni received a BA in Film and Digital Media from Deakin University, Australia. Welcome, Ashni. Our second speaker for the day is Ayusha Sreshta. Ayusha is the founder designer of Amo, a conceptually driven handmade accessories brand which focuses on preserving and elevating traditional crafts, skills to create sustainable employment among local artisans of Nepal. She has a background in sociology and graphic design, with her interest in understanding her roots, human emotions, experiences, and reflecting them through her design in jewelry. Welcome, Ashni and Ayusha. We will be starting the conversation with Ashni Nanayakara's work. Thank you.
I would like to start by thanking Varna and the team at Design United for organizing this conversation and for inviting me to be a part of it. And also to Clayworks for providing us with the space to make it possible. So to start, I would like to mention that I am a street photographer. So my background is in street photography, and my practice has been an ongoing exploration of how we relate to our environments. I'm going to start my journey and go because I think that where I am right now is an amalgamation of everything that I have experienced. So this project, People and Color, was created over the span of 3 years during my travels between Sri Lanka, India, and Australia. And I was interested in how the environments we live in shape us and how we shape the environments we live in. And to do this, I would photograph relationships between people and the architecture of the street with a central focus on color. In 2017, I solo traveled across Tasmania for 30 days, and this marked a significant shift in my practice because accustomed to shooting the streets of Sri Lanka and India, where every corner bustles with activity and change, I was suddenly met with this stark contrast of emptiness in Tasmania. Devoid of human presence, these spaces seem to be in a state of limbo, as if something had just happened or something was just about to take place. And I found myself really drawn to the actual formal elements of the built environment. I started to observe the colors and the shapes and the lines, and also to observe these environments at different times of day and how different kinds of light would change the mood of these spaces. So moving forward, I became interested then in focusing primarily on the built environment and also taking a step back and to show the broader context, showing the relationship between the built environment and the natural landscape. I also became quite interested in the actual spatial composition within the image itself. So using directional and leading lines to draw the viewer into the image and across the image, making them aware of the space itself. Taking this and moving forward, I was interested in depicting the built environment in relation to the natural landscape by photographing structures that are built to contain or divide the natural environment. So once again, using these leading lines to draw us in, making this space visible, and also making these connections between these structures and the natural landscape. I was really interested in this contradictory relationship that humans have with the natural environment, which is our tendency to impose ourselves on nature while simultaneously separating ourselves from it. So I discovered the Nabatong Community Hall on one of my road trips in search of these structures. And I was immediately drawn to the form of this architecture and the peculiarity of its existence in this vast landscape. It reminded me of Donald Judd's sculptures in Marfa, Texas, where they seemed completely out of space, but at the same time, they seemed at one with the landscape. So to photograph this juxtaposition, I photographed the structure from a low angle to fill the frame with the structure, but again, using the leading lines to connect the architecture to the landscape, and also using color relationships to make that connection. The thing I was most drawn to about this image, though, was this idea that the viewer is asked to contemplate the existence of this structure, to question if it is real or how it got there, which in turn makes them question the authenticity of the photograph itself. So taking that idea forward, I was interested in how I might further alter reality using photography, or if it is possible to explore its formal abstract capabilities free from context. So around this time, I had just moved back to Melbourne to live and study, and I found myself spending most of my time in the city, and my relationship to space completely changed. Everywhere I looked, I was faced with the idea of spatial density or a maximization of space. So to photograph this, I used a long lens or a telephoto lens to compress depth and to completely remove spatial depth and to create these sort of 2D collage-like abstract compositions. So I explored a variety of color combinations, color relationships, harmony, contrast, rules of tension, directional lines. And as much as I wanted to explore the aesthetic in its purest form, could not separate the fact that this was architecture and buildings. So the aesthetic could not be separated from the context of the architecture. So by accepting the fact that photography is essentially a tool of representation, I wondered how I could incorporate this into my abstract compositions instead of trying to disregard it. So I started to revisit abstract painting from the 20th century, and I was particularly drawn to the work of Agnes Martin and Pierre Mondrian, who employed the motif of the grid. So the grid is a visual motif that democratizes the aesthetic and completely removes the hierarchy within the image so that we view everything at once and there's no central subject. And this, again, is practiced by photographers, particularly Andreas Gursky. So Andreas Gursky incorporates representation into his abstract compositions by creating a twofold visual experience. These images are actually quite large scale, and when viewing them in a gallery setting, the viewer, when standing at a distance to the picture plane, sees an abstract composition. But when you move closer, it turns into representations of apartments. So moving forward, I started to look for ways in how I might incorporate representation into my abstract renditions of architecture. And one way I found to do this was by literally twisting reality or changing the orientation of my images. This small act allowed me, also when photographing these spaces, keeping that in mind that I would rotate them in post-production. And the small act allowed me for a moment to remove representation and to confuse the viewer so that when you looked at these images, you didn't see a building, but rather you noticed its formal properties first. This allowed me to render representations of a familiar cityscape into abstraction by disrupting the logic of the picture plane. And this allowed me also to deny the buildings their authority and to treat them purely as design features that I could manipulate. So I started to search or explore different ways I could arrange them together, using even the sky as an element. I also became very interested in these forms I found in the architecture and how I could represent them to create new forms or to create new compositions. Again, using the sky, using line, using the grid. And this also made me very aware of space. I then also began experimenting with the reflections I found on the facades of buildings. So using these to create different surface planes within the image. So for instance, we have the foreground, the midground, the background, and your eye moves from each plane back and forth. Gernot Bohm articulates that buildings accentuate and focus the sense of space. They entail movement suggestions, they convey experiences of narrowness and expansiveness, and they articulate space itself as an expanse. So Gernot Bohm really helped me understand that architecture isn't about giving form to design or to matter, but rather it is about giving form to space. It is about making space visible. And this really changed my perception in how I view architectural spaces and made me think about ways in how I might generate atmosphere into these spaces and make the space visible. And one photographer who explores this idea is KDK, or Dokyeon Kim, and he takes these familiar spaces and by using, again, these visual motifs and making us aware of the space, he transforms them into spaces that seem unreal, making us question not only if these spaces exist, but also if this image is real. So moving forward, I started to look for ways in how I might create atmospheric spaces. And one way I did this was through the use of light. And through this method, I was able to generate atmosphere into these spaces and make these spaces visible. And this started to really get me thinking into why it is important that we generate atmosphere into these spaces and about how we inhabit these spaces. And it really made me think about the fact that we aren't really present in space anymore, and how our continued and increasing exposure to the online environment means that while we exist in one place, we also exist in many places at the same time. Lawrence Scott describes this as the fact that we are now witnessing a remapping of here and there in accordance with the go-go gadget elasticity of our online selves. The pressures of every-awareness, which calls for a collapse of here and there, can produce a sense of absenteeism and the suspicion that, despite being in many places at once, we're not fully inhabiting any of them. So what does it mean to be inhabiting or being present in one place, but also being in many places at once? What is that doing to how we interact with our environments, our physical spaces? How are these physical spaces changing to accommodate this act of being everywhere? William J. Mitchell says that embedded within a vast structure of nested boundaries and ramifying networks, my muscular and skeletal, physiological, and nervous systems have been artificially augmented and expanded. My reach extends indefinitely and interacts with the similarly extended reaches of others to produce a global system of transfer, actuation, sensing, and control. My biological body meshes with the city. The city itself has become not only the domain of my networked cognitive system, but also and crucially the spatial and material embodiment of that system. So what is a network society? It is a term that is coined by Manuel Castells, which summarizes the cultural, political, social, and economic changes caused by the spread of information technologies and their network structures. A non-place, which is a term coined by Marc Auger, refers to places of transience. It designates two complementary but distinct realities, spaces formed in relation to certain ends, and the relations that individuals have with these spaces. So a non-place can refer to places such as an airport or a train station, temporary spaces that we're just meant to enter and then leave. So I started to view the city as this network society, as this non-place for us to be but not be. Paul-Émile Rieu explores this idea of the city as a non-place. He is interested in our shifting relationship to space and place and the way that we think about the environment and nature. He takes us to places both inward and alien that could exist in the real world as well as the virtual one, to disrupt our perception and break free from what we know to be true. So I started to look at photographers who depicted the city in this way, as this hive mind, as this network society. And I started to look at how they visually achieved this. So Michael Wolff, for example, he filled the frame with the buildings so that we don't know where they begin or end. Tom Blackford, again, using that technique of turning the perspective or altering the orientation of the images so that we don't have a sense of space or place. The use of light to create this network society where everything is linked and connected. So how can I then use photography to represent the global city and urban architecture as a metaphor for 21st century hyperconnected network societies to examine our increasing mobilities within the virtual realm? So my intention here really is to explore our increasing exposure or presence within the online environment and how this affects human behavior. And to do this, I investigate the built environment, which is the physical infrastructure that shapes our experiences and connection to the networked world. So the city, with its glass towers and metal structures in a constant state of development, is a physical manifestation of our advancing technological society. It symbolizes our increased mobilities within the global hyperspace and metaphorically illustrates our dual existence between the real and virtual worlds. Accessing the digital realm requires contradictory behavior. We alienate ourselves to engage with community online, or rather we disconnect to connect. To portray this paradoxical duality of our existence between the real and virtual worlds, I sought out contemporary forms of architecture, which illustrates ideas of the city as a site of isolation and transition. So one of this idea is most evident in the one-way glass facades of apartment buildings and corporate towers. The person who exists behind the glass is separated from the reality of the world below, while the pedestrian on the street is inhibited from peering inside, isolating each individual like nodes in a network. Again, using the motif of the grid and rotating images, using reflective surfaces, geometric forms, to really use these spaces that already exist and transform them to explore this new concept. Paul Virilio says that the virtual city of today exists in real time, but not in real space. My aim here is to create images that challenge perceptions of reality, scale, location, and spatial composition. By utilizing this methodology, the buildings are denied authority both visually and symbolically as rational structures of social order, corporate power, and surveillance. They instead resemble network circuitry or digital code, probing notions of the city as a spatial domain for our mechanized digital lives. So this image, for example, we have the Mitchell House, which is an iconic symbol of 20th century commercial architecture. And over here, we see it merging into the glass towers of the 21st century. But the building in the background is denied authority and instead resembles digital code. So I think it's important that we view things through the current lens of the pandemic, because prior to the pandemic, we would juggle our presence between the online and virtual worlds, the physical and online environments. Basically, if we got bored or tired of one, we could escape to the other. However, the virtual environment, with its inherent nature of social distancing, while allowing us to stay connected, has changed from being separate to reality to becoming reality itself. The city, already in a constant state of surveillance and hyperconnectivity, exists predominantly in the virtual realm. It is a hive mind. It is a non-place. It provides us the space to exist and simultaneously disappear. It is at once concealing and transparent. So I'm going to leave you with two questions by Kristen Schaff and Elizabeth Grayson in Reimagining the City, which has been a driving force for my project. So they state that the prediction is that 70% of the world's population will be urban by 2050. What will this world be like, and what kind of spaces will humans be making for themselves? How does the human subject relate to time, space, place, and being now and in the urban future? And on that note, I'd like to leave you with an excerpt from Me++. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashani, for sharing your wonderfully introspective work that examines contrasts, disruptions, transitions through your lens, made more relevant and relatable during these socially distanced pandemic times. Also, for taking us through your beautiful process and a poetic search for space, atmosphere, and perhaps a new city. Thank you. We would like to now invite our second speaker, Ayusha Sreshta.
Before I start, I just want to quickly thank Clayworks and Design United India for giving us this opportunity. I think it's a great initiative, and I'm honestly very glad to be on this platform. So to start off with my journey about Amo, or the brand itself, it's a very personal journey. I started the brand because I was trying to find my own identity, or trying to find my roots. For more than 10 years, I was away from home. So when I did decide to come back to Nepal and settle here, I felt like a complete outsider. So much so that I had to almost unlearn and again relearn simple basic things, like even the language. I was having a lot of difficulties communicating in general with my family, and of course outside people too. So that's why the whole presentation I've done back to basics, because I feel like this is a very personal journey. So here you can see a beautiful door, and this is a very authentic traditional style of architecture that you would see around the old cities in Kathmandu. So why I've also said journey inwards is I felt like I was entering a phase where I did not know or did not understand why I had the thoughts, or why I had the discomforts, why I felt like I did not belong. So this simple pendant that you see, it's called Chandra Surya. This actually is on our Nepali flag. For the longest time, for me personally, I felt like my identity as a Nepali was just being associated with symbols, or with meanings, or language, food. But I never had the opportunity, or never even thought about what it actually meant to be a Nepali, or to feel like I belonged in the country that I was born in and that I called home. So this is Patan Darbar Square. This is just 10 minutes walk from my house. And as you can see, this is a beautiful place, and this is right before the earthquake. So a lot of the temples that you see are now actually being reconstructed. So I had planned to start Amo much before the earthquake in 2015. However, after the earthquake, I realized this is need of the hour situation, where a lot of the artisans, especially the ones that were based from home and who were practicing traditional skill sets, they were completely unemployed. They were unable to work. So I really had to sit back and think how I could immediately respond to this situation as a designer. So even though my background is in graphics and sociology, I'd never dabbled into jewelry. It was just a passion or a hobby that I like to collect jewelry from around the world. I realized a lot of the people that I lived around in Patan were metal craftsmen. So before I even go forward with the metal artisans around Patan, I have to say that Nepal is a very small country and we're very heavily reliant on tourism and export. So we do export a lot of the Nepali handicrafts. But in the current situation, even during the last 2 months of the lockdown, because there was no demand and no export, we had nearly 2 billion loss of almost 2 billion rupees. So you see, because we're so reliant on the outside, I realized there's really a lack of in or local consumption, which I thought was a big problem, and I wanted to change that, even if it was just me making a conscious decision or choosing to consume or buy only locally made products. So here, actually, this is where my journey started. Even though I was really interested in art and design in general since I was a young child, I never pursued it because I felt like it was not something I could relate to. And because I did not study in Nepal, I was always very hesitant. And I felt this very big gap between understanding where the roots of my culture or the art and design or even the thinking about art and design started or came from. So my easiest way for me to sit and understand was actually to go into the museums who had a lot of our art and culture, and especially these metal sculptures. So these are from the Metropolitan Museum. It's from their collection. And I realized how beautiful, intricate these artworks were, and how less of these I was getting to see when I walked around into the old cities or even in our own museums. So the quality of work that I felt that was outside Nepal was much more superior than what was in Nepal. So I started asking these questions to myself, like, how did this happen? Why did this happen? So I think that's where the journey also started, as I was exploring these aspects of my culture, I was also getting to understand that all these craftsmen and the artisans who were working with any of the material that we could find here, they were very culturally and religiously inclined. So I think that gave me a perspective to understand that this is where my roots is. This is what it makes sense to me. So that actually all these different questions and journey actually pushed me to start Amo, like I said in the beginning. So also I have to say, because the Nepali market is so small, I realized the consumption power was very, very low for the local market, and also the spending capacity was very minimal. One of the major reasons was because we were not producing quality products. It was mostly leftovers that were exported, or the designs, because a lot of our designs came from outside, they were very generic. I did not seem or find to any jewelry or anything to do with handmade products that were very authentically Nepali or targeted to the Nepali audience. So when I started, I had a clear clarity as to what I wanted to do with the brand that I did start. So I did know that as a designer, I wanted concept to be the crucial aspect of where I was deriving my designs from and what it meant. Ethical was exceptionally important for me because I did realize a lot of the artisans or anybody working in the handmade sector were being exploited. People who do import goods from a third world country like ours were focusing because the prices were minimal. The labor charges, as they say, are very nominal to what they would get outside. So I did know that a lot of work did go on to producing anything to do with handmade. However, I realized there's a big gap as to what they were getting paid and what it was being sold at. Sustainability again, because Nepal is such a small country, I realized we barely have any raw material plantations, processing plantations. So we are very reliant on importing a lot of even the raw materials, even though they are naturally, we're very rich. Raw materials like metal or even wool processing, cotton processing, these are things that are slowly coming up. So I really wanted to focus on how we could reuse the materials that was already being used within the community or by the society. So this is one of the pieces that we recently did launch. It's a hair clip. So this piece, I have to say that I started working with just one artisan. It was like a mission, if I could just work with one artisan and be able to sustain him or give him employment or sustain his family, that I could move forward progressively. But because I started right after the earthquake, I realized there were a lot more people who wanted to come on board, just work. And also, I realized one of the reasons why a lot of these artisans were not being able to get work or not being able to sell their items, or because they were creating these beautiful, very intricate, but time consuming sculptures. So my thought process was, how can I create something that's easier to make, easier for the target audience to buy, and not have, and also something that they could keep buying. So then that's how the idea of starting with jewelry started, because I did know jewelry is very heavily influenced. Jewelry in our culture is very, very important for the where we have a lot of functions and people love to put on gold jewelry. So that's why I was like, okay, let's start with jewelry. So the one artisan that I started with, it was very difficult to start too, because these skill sets are father to son passed down. So women were playing very limited role in this field. So it was difficult to gain their trust because they felt like an outsider. And because they were home based, they were not very keen or open to bringing in an outsider or welcoming them into their house, because it was very personal for them. So it took me a lot of time. It took me about 6 to 9 months just to gain their trust. And that's how I started with one design. And then that's how the trust was built. And once the trust did start building up, then he would refer me to other friends, other family members who he knew needed work and had the skill sets. So that's how it slowly started. So as I said, because Nepal, the products we found in Nepal did not have the authentic Nepali-ness, I would say, or I did not find they appealed to my personal liking. So all the products that I do create or design, they're very focused on two major things. One, the skill sets of the artisans that I work with. The other, how can I create a dialogue, or how can I create or relate the piece that I'm creating, that it could go back into starting conversations about what it means, why did it come, how and why are we still using certain symbols or motifs or religion or even culture that we follow. So this is just the beginning of the work process that we start with. So I have to also admit that a lot of the artisans were not used to getting graphics or getting sheets or spec sheets. They were a very freehand. You would tell them to design something, they would do it freehand. Specifications, size were something they were not prioritizing as much. So when I started with them, right from the beginning, I knew that I wanted them to have an understanding of what is happening around the world. How could we progress? So I wanted it to be a two-way learning mechanism. So I started with graphics because also that is my background and that's what I was very comfortable with. So then I would print everything, give them the spec sheets, give them the size specifications, and that's how they also, I think, got an understanding of what it would be like to work in a more professional environment. So this piece that you're seeing, it's for the same piece of jewelry. Now I'll briefly talk about few of the pieces that I have created in the past. So this was the first custom order that I received, and this is actually very special to me because it's very intricately rooted into Newari culture, and I do belong to that culture. So this is, in our culture, all young women, before they turn a certain age, they celebrate of their first wedding. So this marriage actually happens with the sun god, and so this also shows how progressive the culture itself was, because women get married to the sun, and when they do get married in actuality with a man, even if the person dies, they would never become a widow. So this was just trying to, protect the women from the being outcasted, or from being labeled as a widow and not being involved in the cultural or social aspects of the society. So this piece was for a little girl who was just 11 when she had this ceremony. So every aspect of this piece has its own meaning. So we have to spend 11 to 12 nights in a room away from sunlight, away from any male presence. You cannot look at men, you cannot hear them. So it's a very traditional practice, yet I feel like it was very progressive, and I still feel it is very progressive. Now, because I started Amur right after the earthquake, it was very important for me to address what the country did go through, or what we survived. We lost a lot of heritage, temples, buildings. So I wanted to reflect on that, and also because I realized even though the reconstruction and the planning and the process for the, especially the temples, did start almost immediately after the earthquake, it would not be the same. What we've lost could not be replicated, especially since these temples around the old cities from where I am, Patan, they were more than 400-500 years old. So I felt like, how could I pay respect to what we've lost, or what we're going to get in the new form of these architectures, or the work that was being done by the artisans who have been practicing traditional skill sets. So I did a series called Garima, which also means dignity. So I wanted my artworks to reflect the motifs or the designs that were very visible on wood carvings done on the temples. So these designs are just simplified. Also because the wood works were very old and weather worn, so they had lost their charm yet had their own charm. So you would not see as much details in those works. At the same time, you could tell the shape and the form. So this series was completely just to show respect to the monuments that we lost. So each piece is actually from different temples that fell down in Patan. Now this one is completely very, very personal again, and completely something that I'm still working on, even though I started this in 2017. One of the reasons I came back and settled in Kathmandu was for my grandparents, because I realized for the largest time of my life, I was away and I never got to spend any quality time with them. I felt like they didn't know me, or I didn't know them as much as I would have wanted to. So my grandmother became my best friend. I had to come back again, like it's like going back to the basis. I had to come back. I had to get to know her. I knew I had to know how to interact with her, because by the time I did come back and stayed with her, she was already in her late 80s. So, but the great thing was she was still very alert, very active, and she would be very inquisitive. She would ask me questions about my work, what my passions were, what I wanted to do in life. So it really helped me also understand where or my thought process, just some form of similarity that I had with her. It really grounded me and made me feel like I do have some place where my base starts. So even thankfully, right after I started my collection, in a few months she passed away, but I'm just grateful that she did get to see. And the collection is called Mera Amako Bagaita, which means my grandmother's garden. So my grandmother was very, very passionate about flowers. She would love to stroll around in the garden, plant new flowers, like talk to me about them, tell me about various flowers and plants. But she had a stroke in 2017, after which she could not really go out into the garden or move around. Yet she would always look out the window and then talk about the crows or talk about pigeons, whatever she could see in the garden. So I did this whole collection where I had memories of her favorite flowers, or things that she just in general talked about. So this is like an ongoing practice that I wanted to continue, and I probably will for a long time. Now, this is a very recent collection that I did. Apart from being or involving artisans and trying to work with them, and of course giving them employment, I felt like the jewelry could become major conversation starters, or at least make statements, or have the base to something that meant something, or involve more people. So I wanted it to be more inclusive, and also again, start conversations. It would not just be about buying jewelry or something that looked beautiful, or something just you're buying out of aesthetics value. So this was to celebrate Pride Month. that ended in June. So the whole month, unfortunately, because of the lockdown, we could not work as much on the shoot or on the designs. However, I still feel like this showed that the simplicity in the design also related to the topic of inclusive, including LGBTQ. So this is progressive. Nepal has been quite progressive in this matter. However, yet the topic has not gone ahead anymore. It's been a couple of years that same-sex marriage was allowed in Nepal, and people are quite open, accepting. We talk about it, but in the constitution and in general, there has not been any progress. There has not been any conversation that's been pushed forward as of yet. So the image that you see on my right is a lotus. It's a form of lotus that you would see outside temples or houses, and it's very quite rampantly visible if you walk around the city. So the lotus is put right outside your door at the entrance, and usually this is where before any function, or almost some people use it every day before they do their morning ritual or puja. This is where you light the lamp, or put an incense, or put some rice or flowers, however you start your day, or especially during Dashera and Diwali that we call Tihar and Dasai. This is where the actual sense of the culture starts. So I realize this is something that we cross by all the time, and it's almost become something that we've overlooked. And at the same time, because I had been thinking about creating designs to or in respect for the LGBTQ community, I realized, we're acknowledging it, yet not taking it forward, not conversing about it. So I felt like this had a correlation in the journey itself. We pass by it, we think about it, yet we were not acknowledging it as much as we should. So in that aspect, I just decided to correlate it, and all the pieces from this collection is very similar to the form of lotus, and how I could. And then this happens to be my one of my closest friend who volunteered, and I'm very glad that she decided to become my muse for the collection. So we had a lot of these conversations, and I also did reflect on if he felt that this was good, or if the designs did speak to him personally too. So I've talked about three different kinds of inspirations or collections that I've had. One that I think is very embedded in the cultural or the historical or architectural form, that has been a very obvious inspiration. The second, something that is very personal to me. And the third, something that I feel like needs to be discussed, and something that a lot of people think jewelry is just for aesthetics or something that you buy, wear, and end the conversation there. But I wanted it to have at least a statement as to why and how. So in Amod, like I said, we do focus on ethical sustainability, and at the same time, because it's so rooted in the culture and who I am, or what my culture is trying to teach me, or what I understand of it, each piece that I do design also has its meaning in respect to a cause. So Love Hope earrings, actually I designed after meeting somebody who had just lost a vision, and she had to start learning Braille. I realized it was a big struggle for her, because she was very used to doing things her way, but then she had to step back and then again unlearn and learn how to go on in life. So all the designs in this collection, Love Hope earrings, I fund eye surgeries for people who are in need. And then the easiest way to do this, I realized, was to be in contact with doctors, actually talk to them and understand, because they are the ones who have patients who they would know whether they need financial support or need immediate surgery. So we've created a very simple way of where we've made our brand also approachable for doctors or people in need of assistance in health, education sector. Now, rose earrings, again, it's something very, very personal to me. I lost my aunt to cancer about 10 years ago. So Rose was her name, and as a family, we started a foundation where we prioritize on spreading awareness about various cancers. Also focus on children cancer and how we can fund care for them. So again, from this hearings, also all the funds that we do get, we help children in need. So apart from just providing them medical assistance, we also actually look into how we can keep them occupied, or what we can do in terms of art and education during their stay at the hospital. So it's now not fun just for the medical purposes, but at the same time, just to look into the overall well-being of the child and also their family. Usually in Nepal, most of the families that come from outside Kathmandu are the ones who would need the most assistance. So that's where we step in, and then even if the family needs stay or food, lodging, all of these, we do use the funds for those purposes too. Now, the third one, rhino cufflinks, this is very simple. Any design that I create that's inspired or based out of animals, we try and fund the animal shelters, or just, spreading awareness about animal well-being, welfare, because this is also a very crucial topic close to my heart. Nepal, in general, we have very diverse animal, birds, and plants. At the same time, I personally also realized I was not aware of the types of plants, animals, or even birds, except for the national birds and animals. So there was this whole gap. I knew about other countries, maybe more than my own country. So I wanted to start this series just to, get people to talk, or at least acknowledge that, yes, we are aware of the diversity within our own country. So I think my talk was very brief. How I would want to end is, it's very crucial to look back into where we are and actually appreciate the traditional skill sets that we do have, especially in today's time where everything is getting very commercialized, where everything can be made mass produced and at a much, much cheaper cost. But I think we forget that that is creating a direct impact on our cultural or traditional practices, which is actually dying. So I also want to reflect on the current situation. Because I started my brand right after the earthquake, I was mentally prepared to also know how to sustain, and if there was another pandemic or a natural disaster, how can I keep my artisans safe too? So the business model is very simple. The profit that we make is equally divided. And then, so it's become, the only reason the brand is self-sustaining is because it's like a more of a collaboration with all the artisans that I work with. So we sit together, we decide on the products, I do the designing, they do the production. We do only limited pieces. We do not focus on mass production. Each piece is actually either we produce 10 or 50. At the max, we have 3-4 designs that we call classical, which we continue, especially the Chandra Surya series, which people feel very related to and they keep buying. So the model is really to give or highlight the skill sets that the artisans have and give them the due respect that they do need, and also to make the local consumers aware of the potential within the own country, and also hopefully try and make them tap into the available skill sets or even the materials within my own country, and then take it forward instead of just focusing on trying to do something that's very out there in the world, but not having the essence or the root or the base to where I come from or where we are from. So I think that is it. Thank you so much.
Ayusha, thank you for sharing your wonderful work that embraces memories of the past, is so culturally rooted, but also is adapting to current times and tastes. We also admire your attempt at reviving and keeping alive this traditional craft of jewelry design, and moving beyond in looking at its meaning and innovating to make it relevant to current times. Thank you, Ayusha and Ashni. With this, we open our session for conversation. We would like to invite the audience to share your questions for the presenters. please type in your questions for Ayusha and Ashni. Also, please leave feedback. With this, I would like to introduce and welcome our moderators for the conversation, two fifth-year students of architecture. Shubham Nagarkar from Pune's Brick School of Architecture, who is currently an intern at VSLA, is interested in both travel and the environment. Our second moderator for the day is Amana, who is a student at the Brak University, Dhaka, Bangladesh, with an interest in design and writing. She is also an intern at Our Design United. Welcome, Shubham and Amana. With this, we open the floor for conversation. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, my name is Amana. As Varna ma'am introduced me, I'm currently in my 5th year studying architecture at Brak University, and I am really interested in design and architecture, and I like to express myself through writing. And I'm one of the co-moderators for today, and I'd like to introduce my co-moderator Shubham.
Oh, hello everyone. So my name is Shubham Nagarkar and I'm from Pune, from Brick School of Architecture. So firstly, I would like to thank Ayusha and Ajni for that amazing presentation. It was really, really insightful and really, really interesting. And the work that you're doing towards the society and creating awareness about different things is really commendable. So I would like to ask Ashni about, so you just mentioned that about large scale photography. So, can you just elaborate on what exactly do you mean by large scale photography?
So do you mean by large format photography? So that means printing my prints really big. So what I realized with my initial abstract compositions was that when they required a small scale, you could not, the first thing you saw was the architecture or the representation. And through experimentation, I realized that I had to increase the scale of my images so that the viewer becomes really immersed in the formal properties and gets lost in the abstract composition. And so they don't see the architecture or the representation first, but what they see is the abstraction. And to achieve the large scale photographs, I shoot on medium format film photography, which allows me to print really large scale photographs.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, no worries.
At first, I'd like to say, Dashini and Ayusha, thank you for your brilliant presentations today. Ayusha, I loved how you started your brand with a cause in mind, and how you use your brand to address a lot more, so many more issues. And my first question would be to Ashini. Ashini, I love your presentation. I came in with a completely different idea of photography. I didn't know that it could go in the direction that you approached it from. So my first question to you would be, so I see that you've worked in both Sri Lanka and Australia. So I wanted to ask you about the contrast of the landscapes and what you've learned through your work in the medium of photography, and learned about the contrasting cultures between the two places. Thank you.
So I've had different experiences in both the city environment and the rural environments of both countries. So I would say in the city in Colombo, for instance, coming out of this 30-year civil war, the country is focused on development in terms of the tourism industry and developing in that way. But in Australia, the development in the city is more in line with this idea of the network society, or rather that's how I view it. And also in the rural areas, Australia has got vast amounts of landscape, and I became very interested in how the built environment related to those natural landscapes. Where in Sri Lanka, again, it comes back down to really fast, quick development. And I was more interested in how that development was actually affecting the coastlines and affecting the coastal towns rather than the actual environment, rather than the actual architecture. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Ashini.
So next, I would like to ask Ayusha this question particularly. So firstly, I mean, in today's world, people are just behind making money, and there are very few people who think about society, and very few people that think about giving back to the society. And I think the work that you're doing for the needy and the people in need is really, really amazing and commendable. So I would like to ask that you recently came up with a collection in the celebration of the inclusion of the LGBT community. So how did inclusion inspire this collection? I mean, like, it's firstly it's a very brave step that you took, and how did inclusion inspire your collection?
Thank you for the question. So for me personally, it was very normal. I mean, I never gender in general did not play a role in my thought process. What really honestly drew me to people were how they are or how they talk to you or treat you honestly or how they treat anybody else. However, at the same time, I did realize gender in general is a big issue because, like I shared, when I tried to start working with the artisans, they were very hesitant. They did not trust me, and also because I was a woman. So they would always think I had a boss or a male member, somebody um, who was in charge of me or the work I was doing. So that's one of the, and it's yeah, I've faced these issues in the past too, but this is more in specifically with the brand. And the friend that I did feature, so we became fast friends, and I never asked or bothered, what his preference or what or anything. It was just he's a great friend. However, he felt the need to come out to me. And that's when I realized that this is something that for me, it might be very natural to accept people as they are and who they are, but it's not the same situation around the world, and especially in my own country too. So I realized the need to actually address this, even though for me it was very natural, it did not make any sort of difference to me. So that's why I was like, okay, this is something. So you said, this is something bold or like a statement. For me, it just very spontaneous. It's something that I believe in. And at the same time, I do believe in inclusion in the sense like, I do not believe that anybody should be treated differently because they choose to be or are the way they are. So it was something very normal. I hope that makes sense for me, but to the world, it's not. There's still issues. There's still discrimination that happens here in Nepal and around the world too. So I felt like even though a lot of people have said, your personal opinions or your personal political views or what you believe in does not have to reflect on your brand, and especially because you're just a jewelry brand. At the same time, I think it makes a lot of sense because jewelry in general is associated only with women. So I want the jewelry in itself to become genderless. Whoever wants to wear it can wear it. Whoever likes to wear it can wear it. So this for me was just making a statement and just letting people know that, we accept you the way you are. I hope that somehow summarizes your question.
Yes, 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 sure it does. So next we have a question from the audience. So, okay, so this question is for Ashini. So, how does this virtual inquiry relate to you on a personal level? How do you separate the need to question from artistic purpose or creation with personal inquiry?
So actually, all my questions I ask for artistic purpose or creation is actually driven by my personal inquiry. So my interest in exploring the online environment actually stemmed from realizing how deeply embedded I was in that environment and how the devices that I use, social media, the internet, I started to really look at what this was doing to my own life. And that's really what led me to ask these artistic questions. So all my art is driven from personal inquiry. So I actually don't separate it. That's why my work is so personal to me, because it's my way of exploring my environments. And that's what I mean when that my photographic journey is an ongoing exploration of how we relate to our environments. It's really an exploration of how I relate to my environments. And I think that stems from, again, coming from Sri Lanka and now living in Australia and having these two places that I connect or associate with. Constantly trying to, figure that out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ashini. So our next question from the audience is directed towards Ayusha. Ayusha, Aisha asks, how integral is art or craft revival to the long-term goal of sustainability?
I personally think it's very, very important for the revival. I did mention briefly in the talk too, as a small country that is very dependent on imports and dependent on income generation from the outside world, it's crucial that we start or become very conscious of the steps that we do take within the society to generate income within. So art and craft is something that is generational in our country, and we're very, very rich in that. And I think a lot of it is being forgotten because, one, it's hard. So it's hard to practice. Also because there are no formal training or schools where we can go and learn it. You either have to be born in a certain caste to actually get immediate access to the knowledge. But that also is changing very slowly. Now, a lot of the artisans do take in outsiders from other localities who want to go and learn, So as long as we can still practice or structurally pass down these traditional skill sets and make it relevant in today's time, I personally believe very highly in adapt and adopt. So we need to adapt to the changing times, at the same time not forget the roots, because then once we forget it, it's like almost dying. You forget language, you forget writing. So it's the same thing, these skills. That's why with it as a brand, we also focus on documenting these practices. We focus on how does the thought process start. So we do a lot of questionnaires, we sit with the artisans, focus on where or who started it and why the interest came. So like I said, it's very, very crucial for the long-term sustainability, especially of the small communities in small countries where art and culture is very, very rich. And I think it's very crucial for the local consumers or the clients to have this understanding and appreciate and really value what we are capable of and have been producing.
Thank you for that, Ayusha.
Thank you, Ayusha. So I would like to take the next question, which is again for Ashini. So it says, you have mentioned that this pandemic has created a new reality. To what extent do you think your photography's message and meaning sort of shifted for this shift? Do you need me to repeat the question?
No, I have it in front of me as well.
Okay.
So I think it is important to note that I'm not making a statement about, I don't have, with my work, I'm not making an opinion about this, of what's going on with our increasing existence in the online environment. I'm not saying if it's good or if it's bad. I'm merely observing the shift and making you aware of what is going on. Because I think with the technological revolution and digitization, things are happening so fast. And these devices are now so ingrained in our lives that we have not taken a moment to stop and take a step back and to actually look at what's going on and how these things are changing our lives. So I'm merely just creating the space to open this dialogue. I'm not saying if it's good or bad, because I don't believe it is good or bad. I think it's just how the way things are, and we just got to roll with it, but also be aware of what is going on. Hope I answered that question right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashini. So we would like to take our last audience question because we're almost over our time limit. So this question is from an anonymous attendee directed to Ayusha. Ayusha, thank you for celebrating Pride Month with your collection. Do you plan to expand this idea at least in the South Asian region, where there are people in the neighboring countries who would love to be part of this journey?
Yes, most definitely. However, the expansion idea is quite different, I would say. Instead of just, being able to sell or cater my jewelry around the world or even in Southeast Asia, we have been in touch with artisans within the country. For example, just in India too, there are a lot of artisans, a lot of beautiful things being produced. So our goal is, if somebody does like one of our designs from my collection, we would want the work to be given to an artisan in India who could produce for the market there. So I think that's how I would want the economy to run, creating this employment, at least for that one person too. So initially, right now, we are doing shipments and, sending orders around the world. But in the long run, that's how we're trying to do. And also, interesting, there are a lot of parallel and differences in Southeast Asia and in our cultural and practices. So I think there's a lot to learn from each other. And then there's a lot of similarities and differences too. So we're trying to create a more of a collaborative system where we do get artisans from another country or my artisans from here travel and have an understanding of where we're going progressively, or are we even going forward with what we're trying to do. So I hope that slowly, sort of answers the question. If you want to buy directly, yes, well and good. But the long-term vision is really to have a more collaborative form where it's like more local. So where the artisans within the country are also benefiting from what we're trying to do just in my own country.
Thank you so much for that, Ayusha. So I think we'll be taking the very last question of the day. Shubham? It seems we're getting a lot of questions. So this question is for Ashini. It's from an anonymous attendee again. Ashini, where do you see the role of photography in today's increasingly saturated digital space?
Okay, so this is a really complex question because I can sit here and unpack this for like the next hour, because photography is completely shifting because of the digital age, just in terms of the most basic function of how we store memory or how we perceive reality, how we view the world. Because there exists now a photograph of everything you can imagine, and everything you think you know about the world is being seen through a photograph. So photography has really changed how we perceive and see reality and how we see the world. And so this is a very loaded question. Maybe follow me on Instagram and we can continue the conversation.
So Ayusha, your work is just incredible. I love the concept and hope so. My question is to you is that do you in the near future plan to incorporate jewelry which could help the deaf or even any person who goes through difficult time, keeping in mind the essence of tradition and incorporating the modern techniques?
Thank you for such a heavy question, honestly. So this is something that we've been trying to work on, how to make our jewelry that is more inclusive, like I already said. So this, how we tackle these problems are actually working with doctors to begin with, people who do have difficulties, who visually impaired or somebody who is deaf. We really try and sit with them. So right now we're actually in research phase. So I cannot guarantee and say I could produce something that might be meaningful or useful, honestly, for somebody who is having challenges or is facing challenges just in day-to-day life. And but we are making attempts, and we're very conscious of what we could do as designers or as artisans and how we could problem solve these. I would want to say, before I just, because I don't have a definitive answer as of yet. It took me more than 4 to 5 years just to start my brand, because I was doing a lot of research and just trying to make the artisans more inclusive, people more inclusive. So I would not want to do anything that is just baseless. So I would probably need another 2 or 3 years to even come up with an idea, or like, and then because we do a lot of trial, if we have a design to, we'll ask friends, family to wear it, see the weight, all of these functionalities. So this is something very close to my heart. So hopefully we can come up with something that would be very meaningful. Till then, I cannot make promises, because this is something that I have to be very conscious of, and really do a lot of research and put in the knowledge and educate myself. But thank you for again making me aware of, I do have a sense of responsibility to make everybody feel included. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ayusha. This concludes our Q&A session for the day. If you'd like to continue this conversation, please do reach out to Ayusha and Ashini on Instagram. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashini and Ayusha, for your wonderful presentations and spending time with the conversation. Thanks to our moderators for today, Amana and Shubham, speakers and audience for a great conversation today. Have a good evening and see you next week.